WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Thanks so much for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Carolyn Bruck. Ben Thompson has the week off. As we start 2023, this week, we're looking at what to expect over the next year in politics. Here in North Carolina, the state legislature getting ready to tackle everything from Medicaid expansion to congressional district lines. In the meantime, turbulence up in the nation's capital. The year already off to a very dramatic start as the House tackles the task of picking a new leader. Today, we're going to break it all down with two experts following everything happening here in Raleigh to Washington. Joining us now, a good friend of Flashpoint, Catawba College professor Michael Bitzer. Dr. Bitzer, thanks so much for coming on and chatting with us. Let's talk redistricting.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. So let's talk redistricting. It's a subject that, let's be honest, it's often boring and it's in the weeds, but it actually could have real impact for us here in North Carolina. So first of all, what is redistricting? Because I think this is why it tends to get boring, because it goes over our heads a bit.
Sure. All redistricting is basically the drawing of congressional or state legislative lines that will then elect representatives from the voters. And so North Carolina has had a very long history of redistricting controversies going back to the 1980s. And since the 1990s, we have never gone 10 years or a decade in between census where we have had a complete set of all three maps upheld: congressional, state house, and state senate. So certainly if North Carolinians are confused about which congressional district or which state house, which state senate district they are currently living in or could be changed to, this is kind of the history of North Carolina politics.
So how does this impact us? Because it seems like on face value, does it really matter? But it does.
It certainly does, because what North Carolina voters have done are basically sort themselves. In some research that I've done, I've looked at all of the precincts across the state, over 2,600 of them, and nearly 70% of them vote for one party over the other at 60% or greater. And so what North Carolina has basically done is sorted itself. When the map makers, the legislators, start to redraw congressional or state legislative districts, they can basically create districts that will be overwhelmingly for one party over the other based on how voters have been voting.
So they're designing it to favor a certain party over the other. So this summer, we are expecting a decision from the Supreme Court in the case of Moore versus Harper. It's the ultimate question of who has power over those congressional district lines. Is it state lawmakers or the courts? So how do you see that all playing out?
Boy, that's a good question. I wouldn't want to try and speculate what the justices will do just based on the oral arguments back in last December. But it seems like there was a group of justices led by the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, that was trying to find some kind of middle ground. If they went too far to the state independent legislature theory, that would mean that legislatures have complete and unfettered control over things. And that could pose some real issues with the balance of power and the separation of powers within state governments. I don't think that they're going to go with the liberal side and basically discount the theory, even though it is a very novel and ahistorical theory in constitutional law. They're going to try and find some kind of middle ground. What that means for North Carolina and the rest of the country, we'll just have to wait and see what the opinion ultimately is.
Let's talk State House and North Carolina state Republicans. They're just a seat away from holding a supermajority there. Do you think there's any hope that they can overturn anything vetoed by Democratic Governor Roy Cooper?
I think that this is going to be the great question for 2023 and 2024. What is the supermajority governing coalition? And certainly some Democrats are going to be viewed more positively in trying to override a gubernatorial veto. We have seen the parties kind of sort themselves as the voters have, and certainly the governor has been involved in kind of retribution against those Democrats that voted to override his veto. But I think that the House, particularly Republican leaders in the House, will look at things like budgets and be able to direct some funding to Democratic districts that may be persuasive in helping them to override on some issues. We're going to have a whole host of controversial issues taken up by the General Assembly. This will be something that we will have to basically go policy by policy to see where this workable governing supermajority coalition really exists.
It'll make for some good content here for Flashpoint. Let's talk about Medicaid expansion, because issues like that, they have been long the source of disagreement among Republicans and Democrats. Expected to be addressed early on in the session, according to Moore. But currently, North Carolina is one of only 12 states that doesn't provide Medicaid expansion. There are thousands of North Carolinians who need more health care. I mean, that we know that. So how difficult is it going to be for state lawmakers to get something done?
Well, I think, again, the focus is going to be on the state house and what the Speaker, Tim Moore, and his conference will be able to put together. Certainly, there may be an opportunity for a bipartisan dynamic. The governor has wanted this. Democrats have wanted this. This will be the key test within the Republican conference as to how many sign on to this, and can there be a majority within the Republican conference to push through Medicaid expansion. I think now is probably going to be the year. We've had some fits and starts with this. The state Senate is wholly on board with it. So really the focus is going to be within the state house to see if this policy does get implemented.
I want to touch on the fight for U.S. House Speaker, because it has been a fight. That's fight with an underline, right? Because it has been. There's been a battle. And Congressman Dan Bishop from North Carolina and Ralph Norman from South Carolina, they are pushing for a more conservative leader, saying that Kevin McCarthy not conservative enough. What are the long-term effects, if any, of doing this?
Well, I think the easiest vote taken in any U.S. House of Representatives session should be the Speaker of the House. And we have seen this play out for several days. I think the Carolina connection of both Bishop and Ralph Norman really shows that within the Republican conference, there is a fractured governing coalition. And yes, you may have a majority, but do you have a governing majority? And I would also throw in people like Richard Hudson, who's going to be running the campaigns for 2024. He doesn't want to see this really detract from the Republicans governing majority. Someone like Patrick McHenry has been mentioned several times as perhaps a consolidation speaker candidate. We have a lot of Carolina connections to this upheaval in the U.S. House of Representatives, and it will be a real test of how much power these conservatives have over the next 2 years, or whether they are placated and will play along with whoever becomes the speaker.
It's a new year, so do you have any political predictions for us for this year?
Well, I think my crystal ball cracked way back in 2016, and I haven't been able to find anybody to fix it. But I think the dynamic of the House of Representatives, both the national and the state House here in North Carolina, will be a lot of focus on what we will see come out. I think issues like abortion will continue to be in the forefront. That will be something that the states, particularly North Carolina, will potentially struggle over. And then when it comes to both the state legislature and the new Republican-controlled state Supreme Court, how do they work together to really further advance a conservative agenda for North Carolina? I think those are some of the big issues that I'll be watching this year.
And we'll be watching them right alongside you. Catawba College professor Michael Bitzer, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
More Flashpoint coming up after this.